Lauren Sisler here with AL.com, checking in with you, and Michael Casagrande, also with AL.com, our Alabama beat reporter. Always got the boots on the ground in Tuscaloosa. That's why we love you, Michael. How you doing, buddy?
I'm great. How's everything with you, Lauren?
Everything is wonderful. All right, so obviously, some things have moved forward, progressed in terms of now student athletes being allowed on campus for voluntary workouts, and the NCAA, of course, mandated that voluntary workouts could begin on June 1st. And so here for the state of Alabama, that meant Kay Ivey's order, I guess the latest health order that came out on June 8th, in compliance with that, allowed Alabama players to return to campus and begin training. Of course, that's amongst all student athletes, but specifically here, we're talking about football players. So here to discuss that and how Alabama is handling COVID-19 protocols with athletes now returning to campus. You posted something yesterday on AL.com. And so kind of want to go through that a little bit more just to better understand sort of what protocols are in place and how Alabama is handling this fluid situation with COVID-19 still being present. So explain first and foremost how voluntary workouts work, just in general.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to what they normally do in the summer times when they come back. It's workout with the strength and conditioning coaches. It's the new coaches back this year, replacing Scott Cochran, David Ballou. It's kind of the new sports science training system. It's a whole different plan, but it's kind of the same thing. It's not football. They're not out on the field. They don't have position coaches. Nick Saban's not out there coaching them. So it's more the strength and conditioning part of it, and that'll continue until middle of July when the football part can begin.
Yeah, and as we've seen, obviously, a lot of these players, in this off-season period, normally you would have spring ball and then, of course, kind of have this dead period, and then now, obviously, voluntary workouts. It looks a little different this year, to your point, just because of COVID-19. They weren't able to have spring football. Right. So a lot of these guys were conducting these workouts, on their own with their trainers at home, at their home gyms, outside, at the park, wherever it may be. And so I know the format might look a little different for these voluntary workouts, as numbers are kind of a sort of the central focus in keeping the COVID-19 pandemic at bay and obviously eliminating some of the risk there. What protocols have you learned that are in place to ensure the safety of the athletes with the presence of COVID-19?
Right now, the document we got yesterday from the university kind of spelled out some of the protocols, that they're only going to be in groups of 20 or less. So the whole team's not together in one big room working out, breathing, the heavy breathing, because you can't wear a mask when you're doing some of these workouts, but in the building when they're not working out, the masks are required. They had the required training for the sanitation, how to be sanitary, even enhanced sanitation in this era. They're screened daily for symptoms of COVID-19 in case someone were to come down with it, and they were all screened when they arrived, an entry screen for the full test to see how many people were positive and were negative. So those were some of the things. Kind of looking over the list, they can't share towels when there were sweat towels in the gym. They can't do that. So there are some changes. It's obviously a different era.
Yeah, definitely, different protocols in place and different things that are being done. Now, obviously, you had submitted some questions to the university to try to learn more about what protocols are in place for them. Did anything really jump out to you that might be different or even similar to what you're seeing from other universities or schools? Because I'm seeing that a lot of schools are kind of putting out there, what their plans and protocols are. We're sort of learning kind of as we go each and every week what is kind of different or varies from school to school as schools are starting to go back and allow athletes back on campus.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because it's a lot of schools. Every school seems to be taking a different approach as to how they're handling this. Some schools are very forthcoming. Clemson, for example, they put out a whole list, of breakdown of how many players arrived, how many people were tested, how many tested positive for each team, the school, the overall student athlete total. It was all broken down, and I asked for that breakdown from Alabama, and they did not respond with that. They responded with a statement with the document that they sent yesterday, and it didn't include any of the answers to those main questions that I had asked. And I guess the main question they did answer was that they were in fact testing every student athlete who comes back, and there's some schools who might not be doing that much. But as far as numbers, how many people even reported in general, they did not include that. And said any testing numbers were subject to privacy laws that it's up for debate as to which laws those would be, since so many schools, Clemson, even Baylor, they put out a Twitter graphic to even break things down to go with a news release that was, most of these were posted on their university, their athletics websites, their official websites. They were proactive with how they were explaining what their process were for their athletes when they came back. With Alabama, I requested, I sent these questions on June 11th. That was last Thursday, and heard back. Not to bore everybody with all the back and forths, but there was different people involved, and finally heard back from them on Tuesday afternoon, evening, for the story that posted on Tuesday evening. But yeah, most of the questions were left unanswered, and I guess that's up to them. They can decide how they want to answer it. Some schools some schools are very forthcoming, were proactive with what they've released, and Alabama just chose a different route.
So, of course, you can see Michael Casagrande's post and sort of the response to the questions that you asked there on AL.com. So if you want to see that full post, kind of interesting stuff, because I do think that we're in a time period right now where it is kind of learning how to handle things in certain situations. And obviously we did learn that a number of Alabama players did test positive upon return to campus. Do we know anything as of right now as to how that's being handled? If a player is testing positive, what protocol is in place to ensure that that's not being spread to other players, obviously other student athletes, and amongst, the building and the facilities?
Right. No, I mean, it seems like logistically such a difficult situation to deal with. And it was addressed briefly in the document that they, should a student athlete, I'm just going to read it. Should a student athlete test positive for COVID-19, resources and protocols are in place to ensure that they receive the best available care, which includes appropriate space to isolate from other student athletes. So, they will be kept separately. It's exactly how that works. Some schools are more forthcoming than others on those exact protocols, but we don't know that much exactly as to where they've gone, how they're being kept separate, and how much contact they had with players before they knew that they were a positive test. They could have been positive for any period of time that they were with other people. So it's unclear how many other people have tested positive, but I've seen reports of as many as 8 from I think JOX from Jocks Radio had reported that last week. So it's it's an interesting time trying to get as much information as we can for you, but it's not always easy.
Absolutely. And just, kind of to be transparent and sort of what you've learned, I know from these other programs, have you heard of anything that kind of jumps out to you from other programs and what they're specifically doing when players do test positive? It is a matter of like quarantining guys. Is it, contact tracing? How are they able to really do that? Have you, seen or learned of anything that other programs are doing that seem to be maybe working? Again, I know we're all kind of in this learning phase and sort of figuring out how things work. And I know that you have to imagine, with something of this magnitude, there's so many variables and things that have to be implemented, and we really don't have that blueprint for how it all works.
Yeah, no, if you go all the way to the University of Houston, it was Friday afternoon where they just shut down everything. They had, I believe, 6 or so positive tests, so they just stopped their voluntary workouts. They weren't going to move forward. And that's the most that I've heard from anybody in terms of their shutting things down. I haven't heard of anyone else stopping their workouts because of positive tests. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I'd have to read back through some of the different news releases. University of Miami had a pretty extensive rundown of everything that they were going to be doing before and after a positive tests were to be recorded. So yeah, it's interesting to see which schools, and some of them, private schools, the ones who are usually the least, they have the least transparency because they don't have to. You're not subject to the open records laws that some of the public schools are. But the Miamis and the Baylor was very forthcoming in their. They even made a graphic on Twitter to go with the news release that was pretty extensive. So every school's handling it differently. Just is what it is.
And of course, these voluntary workouts go pretty much between now until, fall camp, I guess, would begin, at some point in time, right, leading up to August. And of course, as of right now, do we even have a clear timeline as to when, as of right now, if things stay the way they are, is everything still set to start on time in terms of fall camp, or are we expecting that to maybe look different this year?
Yeah, everything is fluid. You never know what the plans might be. I think the latest plan was mid July for the beginning of fall camp, for the extended fall camp, since so many teams, Alabama included, didn't have spring practice. They were going to give them a little extra time to do some more workouts as a team together, as opposed to the normal early August start time. So we'll have to wait and see.
All right. So another hot topic, and of course, fans want to know: are they going to be able to get into the stadium, come late August, early September into the season? And I think that is the $1 million question, the question that we're all asking, and really don't necessarily have a lot of answers to. But the ticketing situation is something you reported on also earlier this week. It being very fluid in that, as of right now, you have people renewing their tickets for the 2020 season. But what happens if social distancing is implemented? What happens if now you cut your stadium from, 80,000 to 40,000? What does that look like? And you obviously outlined that in your post earlier this week. So maybe you can give us a little foundation for what you learned, from the school specifically, about how they're handling this situation in the event that protocols have to be in place, that they cannot put a full amount of fans in the stadium on game day.
Yeah, no, they're still working that out too. That they, it's on their plate. They're aware of it. They haven't said exactly how they would handle the distribution of tickets, which I think will be a very fascinating study as to how they go about that process, and how different schools will no doubt view it differently. But it would seem at this point that it would be a pretty long odds to see 100,000 people in Bryant-Denny Stadium for any game at this point, just given the trend lines with the way the infections have gone. It doesn't look likely to be a full stadium. So, whether there will be the biggest donors, a lottery, it's going to be very interesting to see, because there are a lot of stakeholders, and a lot of stakeholders who are paying an increased price this year for the premium options that are currently being constructed at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Those clubs, the suites, the loge boxes on the side that used to be the press box, sold for big money, and there will be people who are going to be expecting to have those seats. So there's a lot of money involved in this, obviously, and so it'll be interesting to see how they go about that. But for the most part, I talked to season ticket holders who weren't in those high-end suites, the boxes, and most of them that I talked to, they said that they were going to be renewing. They cited the long waiting list for season tickets, and not wanting to lose their spot in line for season tickets moving forward. And most of them didn't sound too concerned about the health risks that would be associated with going to the game. So it'll be interesting to see how all that evolves, if people's opinions evolve from now until September, when it's actually going to be happening. But it's, another one of those things that we just can't say yet.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, and some of our commenters here, this is obviously, again, a fluid situation, and one that has certainly kept, the athletic staff, the trainers, the doctors, the coaches, everyone on edge, trying to constantly plan, figure out how this is all going to come together, what it's going to look like. Nobody seems to know. And of course, all we're left to do is a lot of speculating, but hopefully some of those things will sort of come into vision as we get a little bit closer. And another thing, and a concern, and, Michael, you've been around the city of Tuscaloosa for a very long time. And a lot of these college towns rely on the economy, the boost from the economy, for that 3 or 4 months out of the year when they're bringing in fans, 100,000 plus fans to come into a stadium. So that certainly changes the landscape of what even Tuscaloosa might be expecting if social distancing does go into place and we're not going to be filling the stadium.
Oh yeah, definitely. We've worked on economic impact stories, and the $25 to $30 million economic impact every home game has on, the city of Tuscaloosa. It's hard to, understate. I've talked to different business owners. I've done several things with the Ramajama's owner, and the difficulties that they've experienced with the spring semester ending so abruptly, all the different big events in the spring that they rely on as big revenue, just dried up, graduation, all those kinds of things. So it's it's a multifaceted, multi-pronged story that we'll continue to tell to the best of our ability. That it's not just a football game. It's not 60 minutes on a Saturday. It's kind of the entire economy of that city is largely based around what can happen in those games.
Well, Michael, you're certainly doing a great job of it. Of course, our team out there doing a great job of it. We appreciate your diligence and gathering all the facts and the information and everything to kind of keep us all up to date, because I know everybody's anxiously awaiting to know what the landscape is going to look like come football season. So again, we appreciate you, appreciate all the information and intel, and we'll check back in with you. And for all of Michael Casagrande's posts, of course, you can check those out on AL.com, and we'll check in with you soon.
Well, thank you for having me. It was an honor to speak with you.
Thanks, Michael.